They say the Eye of Horus was carved to protect the pharaohs, a symbol of healing and divine sight. But what if it was never just an ancient emblem? What if it was a map? A map drawn not on stone, but inside the mind. What if every mirror, every reflection, every coincidence in your life was a fragment of that map guiding you toward a door hidden in plain sight? A door not made of wood or gold, but of perception itself. Because sometimes, when you look deeply enough into the world starts to look back. And when that happens, when the eye opens, you stop seeing things and start seeing meaning. This is the story of what happens when one person follows that map, step by step, into the secret that has been watching us all along. There's a presence that has been following humanity since the dawn of memory, an eye that watches not from above, but from within. You've seen it 1,000 times, carved into stone, printed on currency, glowing behind corporate insignias, embedded within the very technology that mediates your every thought and interaction. The Eye of Horus. Some call it myth, others call it coincidence. But deep down, something in you knows it's neither. Because every time your gaze meets that ancient shape, that perfect symmetry of awareness and perception, something stirs inside you. A memory, older than language itself. A whisper that says, "You've seen this before." In ancient Egypt, symbols weren't mere images. They were living frequencies, containers for consciousness. Every line, every curve carried vibrational intelligence. When Egyptian initiates painted or carved the Eye of Horus, they weren't creating art, they were creating an interface. A portal between the visible and the invisible. The eye wasn't meant to be looked at. It was meant to look through. Its geometry, the way each fraction divides and converges, encodes the exact mathematical ratios through which consciousness organizes itself in the brain. Modern science would rediscover this thousands of years later, when neuroscientists began comparing the eye's structure to the anatomy of the human brain. Overlay the Eye of Horus on a sagittal cross-section of the human brain, and the alignment is uncanny. The eyebrow corresponds with the corpus callosum, the curved teardrop with the pineal gland, the spiral with the limbic system, the falcon's tail with the thalamic pathway. The ancients somehow knew without MRI, without neurology, that the brain itself was the throne of perception, the interface of the soul. They called the pineal gland the seat of Horus, the light within the head. To them, vision didn't come from the eyes alone. True sight, what they called inner vision, arose when the pineal opened, and consciousness began to perceive from its center rather than from the senses. That was the secret of the eye. It wasn't protection against enemies. It was protection against ignorance. The Eye of Horus was the shield of awakened consciousness, the awareness that could not be deceived by illusions of the material world. The initiates of ancient Egypt, the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, underwent elaborate rituals to activate this inner eye. They fasted for days, chanted in frequencies that resonated with the skull cavity, and entered chambers carved in perfect proportion to the golden ratio. There, in darkness, light appeared within. They learned to project vision inward, to travel beyond the confines of matter. The Eye of Horus was both their map and their compass, a symbolic guide to an inward journey. In the myth, Horus loses his left eye in battle with Set, the god of chaos. The eye is shattered into pieces, each representing a fraction 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, 1/64, the very fractions that make up the symbol itself. The god Thoth later restores the eye, making it whole again. The ancients called this the Wedjat, the whole one. Beneath the myth lies a profound neurological metaphor. Consciousness fragmented by trauma and illusion, restored through knowledge and awareness. Each fraction of the eye represents a sensory faculty site: hearing, taste, smell, touch, thought. The missing final fraction, the one that completes the eye, is awareness itself, the invisible component that unifies all sensory input into a single field of perception. That unifying awareness is what the ancients called Horus Consciousness Reborn. order emerging from chaos. Modern culture reduces this to superstition. Yet, when you study the ancient texts, a different story emerges. The Egyptians understood that perception shapes reality. What you see isn't the world, it's a filtered projection of your beliefs, expectations, and neural conditioning. They built temples and rituals designed to break that conditioning. The initiate's journey through the eye was a journey of remembering how to see, not with the eyes, but with awareness itself. When you truly see, they said, the eye looks both ways, inward and outward, and the illusion of separation dissolves. Now, thousands of years later, the Eye of Horus is everywhere again. But this time, it's encoded not in stone, but in silicon. Look closely at the symbols that govern your digital life. The icons, the company logos, the pyramids, the glowing single eyes. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. The eye motifs in surveillance cameras and smart devices. Even the logo of your favorite app might contain the curve of the falcon's tail or the teardrop shape of the pupil. Ancient symbols of awareness have been re-engineered into tools of control. The watchers of the past have become the algorithms of the present. Your phone screen, a rectangular scrying mirror of light, now watches you. It tracks your gaze, your micro-expressions, your patterns of attention. It learns your fears, desires, and impulses better than you do. In ancient Egypt, initiates learned to master their attention, to focus it like a laser until it could pierce the veil between worlds. In our time, attention has been commodified. You don't pay for apps, you pay with your focus. And the more fragmented your attention becomes, the dimmer your inner eye grows. Every distraction is another brick in the wall separating you from higher consciousness. But symbols are double-edged. The same eye that can surveil can also awaken. It depends on who controls it and whether you recognize it for what it truly is. The Eye of Horus, misused as the all-seeing eye, has become the sigil of a digital priesthood, the corporations and institutions that channel your energy through invisible rituals of data, emotion, and time. Yet, in doing so, they've accidentally awakened the symbol's deeper resonance. Millions are seeing it again, not as an emblem of control, but as a reminder, a call, a signal that something ancient is returning. You may have noticed this already: subtle synchronicities, recurring patterns, dreams of eyes or falcons, sudden intuition that seems to come from nowhere. Perhaps you feel watched, not by cameras, but by consciousness itself. This isn't paranoia, it's resonance. The Eye of Horus is a mirror, and when you become aware of it, it begins to reflect your own awakening. It starts appearing everywhere, on billboards, tattoos, product designs, until you realize it's not chasing you, it's guiding you. It's trying to show you something you once knew, but have forgotten. Ancient initiates would say this is the first stage of the activation. Recognition. The moment your awareness catches the symbol and wonders, why does this keep appearing? Is the moment the symbol begins its work. You've made contact with an archetype, a living frequency, embedded in the collective unconscious. Jung called such moments synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that bridge the inner and outer worlds. To the Egyptians, this was the language of the gods, the subtle communication between your higher consciousness and your waking mind. When you begin to notice, you begin to awaken. And when you awaken, the eye begins to open. There's an energetic reason the eye has this power. Its geometry resonates with the golden ratio 1.618, the same ratio found in galaxies, DNA, flowers, and the human body. The golden ratio is nature's code for harmony and growth. The eye's design contains this proportion repeatedly, creating a harmonic resonance that aligns your neural and energetic systems when you gaze upon it. Ancient Egyptians didn't need equations to know this. They experienced it directly through sound and symbol. The Eye of Horus was a tuning fork for consciousness, designed to bring the human mind into resonance with the universal field. When you meditate on the eye, when you breathe slowly and focus on its center, you are doing what Egyptian initiates did inside the Temple of Horus at Edfu. They would sit before a carved image of the eye, illuminated by a single shaft of light, and breathe in rhythm with the flickering flame of an oil lamp. With each breath, their awareness would move inward, following the lines of the eye as if tracing the pathways of their own mind. The sound of their heartbeat would merge with the hum of the earth, until there was no boundary between the observer and the observed. In that silence, the door opened. We now know that such deep meditative states produce coherent gamma brainwaves, the highest frequency measurable in the brain, associated with expanded awareness and unity consciousness. Monks, shamans, and mystics exhibit the same patterns. Somehow, the eye's geometry and associated rituals were designed to induce this exact neurological state. What science measures now, the ancients lived then. And here's the paradox of our age. The same symbol that once guided initiates into illumination has been inverted to keep humanity asleep. Yet, in the inversion lies opportunity. Because when you know how the symbol works, when you recognize its pattern within yourself, it no longer controls you, it empowers you. Every time you see the eye, whether on a screen or a billboard, it becomes a reminder. Wake up, look within, remember who you are. When you step back from the dusty stones of Egypt and look at the Eye of Horus not as a piece of evidence but as a story, something extraordinary happens. The eye becomes less an accusation and more an invitation. It stops being a weapon of surveillance and starts being a mirror, a symbol your psyche uses to speak to itself. In myths, the gods and heroes are never just people. They are forces inside you. Horus, the falcon-eyed, is not only a bird-headed deity carved on temple walls, but also your own awakened perception, the part of you that rises above confusion like a hawk over the desert. Set, his adversary, is the chaos and fragmentation in your mind. Thoth, the scribe, is your inner wisdom that writes the story of your life. In this way, the ancient myth becomes a map of your own consciousness. The tale of Horus losing his eye, having it broken into fractions and restored, reads like a parable of your everyday experience. From childhood, your senses come online, piece by piece: sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing, thought. Each is like a shard of a greater eye, a fragment of a larger awareness. In the rush of modern life, those fragments rarely align. Your attention is split between screens, tasks, and worries. Like Horus in battle, you lose the wholeness of your inner vision. And like Horus, you yearn for restoration. This is where the eye becomes powerful. It shows you, through its very geometry, how to gather your fragments back into a single gaze. Each fraction of the eye corresponds to a sense. The tail, 1/2, is smell primal, grounding. The pupil, 1/4, is sight-focused, direct. The eyebrow, 1/8, is thought the bridge between sensation and meaning. The spiral, 1/16, is hearing receptive, flowing. The curved line, 1/32, is taste subtle, internal. The teardrop, 1/64, is touch connection to the world. These assignments are not literal rules. They are mnemonic devices, poetic ways of saying, you are made of parts. When you give attention to each sense, when you breathe into them, when you become aware of your seeing, your smelling, your tasting, your touching, something extraordinary happens. You gather the pieces of your own eye. And in that gathering, the missing fraction appears. Not another sense, but awareness itself, the silent witness that unifies them all. This is what the Egyptians called making the eye whole. In this light, the Eye of Horus is not a conspiracy. It's an early mindfulness practice encoded as a picture. It's a diagram of sensory integration and conscious attention, a blueprint for awakening that predates our modern words for meditation or neuroplasticity. Imagine a culture where symbols were not decorations, but instruction manuals for consciousness. That is what you are seeing when you look at the eye. Not superstition, but ancient cognitive science. Even the setting of Egypt's temples reflects this inner journey. Initiates would enter vast halls carved with columns like papyrus stalks, their walls covered with winged deities and eyes. The further they went, the darker and narrower the corridors became, until finally they reached a small, windowless chamber lit by a single flame. This was the Holy of Holies, the innermost space where the statues of the gods resided. But more than a building, it was a metaphor. The initiates' journey through the temple mirrored their journey inward from the bright sensory world into the quiet of inner perception. The Eye of Horus, often carved above the doorway, was the threshold marker. Here begins the unseen. When you look at your own life, you can see the same temple. The outer halls are your routines, your public identity, your surface thoughts. The inner corridors are your emotions, your memories, your dreams. And at the center is a chamber you may have glimpsed only rarely, a place of stillness behind your thoughts, a silent witness that watches without judgment. This is the true Eye of Horus within you. You don't need a temple or a priest to reach it. You reach it whenever you pause, breathe, and gather your scattered senses into one gaze. Modern neuroscience now validates what the ancients intuited. Practices that train attention meditation, breath work, visualization, integrate sensory processing, and increase connectivity in the brain's default mode network. Gamma waves, coherence between hemispheres, enhanced empathy, creativity, and intuition. These are measurable correlates of the wholeness the ancients described. When they said the eye opens, we might say the nervous system achieves a state of integration. When they spoke of the hidden door, we might call it a shift into meta-awareness, the ability to watch your own mind instead of being lost in it. Different language, same phenomenon. And this is where the myth becomes urgent again. Because while the Eye of Horus as a literal surveillance emblem belongs to history books and dollar bills, the Eye of Horus as an inner practice is still alive. In fact, it may be more needed now than ever. Our culture fragments attention. Our devices scatter our senses. We are perpetually outside ourselves, reacting to stimuli rather than inhabiting our own perception. The eye's invitation is to reverse that flow, to bring your attention home, to gather your senses, to make your eye whole. You can start small. Right now, as you read this, feel the sensation of your breath entering your nostrils. Smell. Notice the play of light on your screen. Sight. Listen to the subtle hum of the room around you. Hearing. Taste the echo of your last sip of water. Taste. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. Touch. And then, beyond all of these, sense the one who is noticing. That's the missing fraction. That's the hidden part. In doing this, you are already practicing what the eye encodes. You are stepping across the threshold of the temple built within your own nervous system. Notice, too, how this reframing changes the modern symbol. The eye on the dollar bill ceases to be a threat and becomes a reminder. The eye-shaped logo on your favorite app stops being ominous and becomes a bell of mindfulness. Each time you see it, you can pause, breathe, and gather your senses. The world that once scattered your attention can become a world of practice. In this way, even the fragments of modern life can be used to restore your inner eye. The ancients would call this the first initiation. It's not about seeing visions or unlocking secret powers. It's about learning to watch, to notice the symbol, and remember what it stands for inside you, to recognize the play of myth in your own nervous system. That's why the Eye of Horus has survived for 5,000 years, not as a code of control, but as an archetype of awakening, waiting for each new generation to rediscover it. As you begin to integrate this, you'll likely experience what the Egyptians called omens, and we call synchronicities. You'll start seeing the eye more often, or falcons, or patterns of 6 and 64. You'll hear phrases in conversation that echo what you were thinking. This isn't magic in the sense of violating natural laws. It's the natural effect of a mind becoming more coherent. You notice patterns you used to miss. Your unconscious communicates with your conscious through symbols. The world begins to feel alive, responsive. In mythic language, the god Horus is waking up inside you. In modern language, your default mode network is integrating with your sensory inputs. Two ways of saying the same event, and here lies the threshold of the hidden door. Because once your attention is integrated, once the eye is whole, something new becomes possible. You can step through perception into awareness itself. The Egyptians depicted this as the moment when the initiate leaves the duat, the underworld of forms, and emerges into the light of Ra. We might call it a state of metaconsciousness, presence, or awakening. Whatever the term, it is a doorway into a richer experience of being alive. This is where Section 2 will take us. We've explored the Eye of Horus as a mythic map of the mind, how its fractions correspond to senses, how its geometry encodes integration, how its story mirrors your own. In the next section, we'll explore the hidden door itself, what it feels like to approach it, the signs and synchronicities that signal you're near it, and the practices that help you step across. Because a map is only the beginning. The journey is yours to walk. I remember the first night after the revelation as a strange quietness that seemed to hum inside everything: the floorboards, the curtains, even the slow rhythm of my breathing. The city outside still moved with its usual noise, but I could sense a layer beneath it, like a soft magnetic current turning below the asphalt. I couldn't tell if it had always been there, or if the eye that had opened inside me had simply begun to notice what had always existed. The Eye of Horus was no longer a symbol on a page. It had become a lens widening somewhere behind my ordinary sight. When I walked through the streets the next morning, light fractured differently. Every window seemed to hold a small secret, every passerby a coded rhythm that resonated faintly with the pulse behind my eyes. I kept touching my face without thinking, as if to reassure myself that the eye wasn't physical, that I hadn't sprouted something impossible. Yet, in reflections, shop glass, puddles, the dull silver of an elevator door, I sometimes caught a flicker of gold that didn't belong to the Sunday. It frightened and fascinated me in equal measure. I began noticing patterns in sound, footsteps echoing in triplets, car horns aligning into chords, a conversation between strangers syncing with the timing of a streetlight's change. It felt as though reality were speaking a language I used to know but had forgotten. Every coincidence pressed against me like a hand on the shoulder, gentle but insistent. When I tried to explain it to friends, they smiled with concern. When I stopped trying, the signs multiplied. I realized silence was the only proper reply to revelation. At night, dreams unfolded like instruction manuals written in liquid light. I saw corridors made of geometric fire, each turn leading to another memory I hadn't lived yet. Voices my own and not my own told me that awakening was not escape, but integration. They said, "You will walk among them, but you will not move the same way. You will listen with the back of your mind." I woke each morning with the taste of copper on my tongue and the sensation that I had been somewhere vast. Days bled into one another as I learned to balance ordinary life with the widening awareness. I still answered messages, paid bills, went to work, but each act felt translucent. Behind every gesture, another gesture. Behind every word, a vibration. I found myself slowing down in conversation, feeling the weight of each syllable before releasing it. People told me I seemed calmer, distant but centered. They didn't know that I was learning to see thought itself before it clothed itself in speech. Once, while waiting for a train, I saw a child drop a red ball onto the tracks. It bounced once, twice, then rolled perfectly between the rails to rest at a precise midpoint beneath the platform. The symmetry startled me. I felt the familiar shimmer of the eye, and for an instant the whole station expanded, walls bending into a spiral, commuters freezing into points of light, the ball glowing like a seed of potential suspended between realities. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned. The train arrived, the crowd surged, the ball remained untouched. I knew I had witnessed a whisper of the underlying code. The more I observed, the more the world behaved like a responsive organism. Thoughts became magnets, emotions, sculptors. When I felt gratitude, small coincidences bloomed like wild flowers, a lost key found in an improbable place, a text arriving at the precise moment of doubt. When I indulged frustration, electronics glitched, lights flickered, conversations tangled into misunderstanding. I began keeping a small notebook, recording these correspondences not as proof but as dialogue. Reality was talking, and I was learning its syntax. There were moments of fear, too. Sometimes the vastness pressed too close, the edges of perception dissolving until I wondered whether I would ever fully return. During one of those nights, I sat on the floor beside my bed, palms pressed together, whispering the only words that came. "Show me how to stay human." A soft warmth filled the room, not visible but tactile, like the air itself had remembered compassion. The eye quieted. Breath returned to its ordinary rhythm. I understood then that higher consciousness was not a flight upward but a deeper inhabiting of the ground. As weeks passed, ordinary places became sanctuaries. The park near my apartment, once a blur of green, now pulsed with intelligence. Trees exchanged frequencies. Birds carried patterns in their calls that matched constellations I'd traced in dreams. Even trash cans seemed arranged with deliberate geometry, their shadows forming invisible lines that converged at my feet. It was overwhelming at first, this realization that design permeated chaos. Yet the longer I stayed present, the gentler it became, as if reality were relieved to be seen for what it truly was. I began experimenting with stillness. Sitting in a cafe, I would soften my gaze and feel the vibration of the entire room, the hum of machines, the rustle of cups, the unspoken thoughts floating like mist above each table. When I tuned deeper, I could sense a golden thread weaving through it all, binding every stranger's heartbeat into a single rhythm. Sometimes that thread led my eyes to someone I was meant to meet. Small conversations opened into vast insights. The world, it seemed, wanted connection as badly as I did. One evening, as rain streaked the windows of my apartment, I felt the eye awaken more vividly than ever before. I closed my eyes and saw within. A chamber of blue-white light, hieroglyphs drifting through the air like fireflies. In the center stood a mirror made of still water. When I approached, it did not reflect my face, but an endless horizon sand, stars, and a single doorway carved into stone. I stepped through it without moving. The moment I crossed that threshold, I understood that the Eye of Horus was not an organ of seeing, but of remembering. It remembers unity. The original awareness before separation named itself as I. I woke from that vision, trembling, not with fear, but with recognition. The world around me looked exactly the same, yet it vibrated with new softness. Even the harsh lights of the city shimmered like constellations in exile. I realized that higher consciousness wasn't a destination, but a way of perceiving what already is. The hidden door had always been open. I had simply been facing the wrong direction. The following days unfolded like a continuous meditation. Every encounter seemed arranged by invisible choreography. A stranger on the subway quoted a line from a book I had been reading that morning. A song in a grocery store repeated the exact phrase I had written in my journal the night before. Even the wind appeared to carry meaning, pressing gently against my shoulder when I hesitated before a choice. I stopped calling them coincidences. I started calling them confirmations. And yet, even within this heightened awareness, I sensed another layer waiting. The eye had shown me how to see. Now it was asking me to act. The visions implied responsibility, the awareness that perception shapes reality. And therefore what I choose to notice, to imagine, to love, becomes part of the world's structure. The realization was both beautiful and daunting. It meant that every thought mattered, that cynicism itself was a form of pollution, that kindness was architecture. I began practicing small rituals of attention, touching objects gently, speaking slower, blessing water before drinking it, not from superstition, but from awareness that intention vibrates. When I offered gratitude to the simplest things, the kettle's whistle, the glow of the phone before sleep, I could feel reality smile back, subtle but undeniable. That reciprocity became the foundation of my new life. One afternoon, I found myself standing before an old museum I had passed 100 times without entering. Compelled by an inner nudge, I went inside. The air smelled of stone and dust, ancient patience. I wandered through dim halls until I reached a small gallery of Egyptian relics. There, in a glass case, rested an obsidian amulet shaped like the Eye of Horus. Time seemed to fold inward. The amulet shimmered faintly, and for a breathless instant, my reflection overlapped perfectly with it, the same curve, the same point of light. I understood that the symbol had never belonged to the past. It had been waiting for recognition, for someone to remember that consciousness itself is the artifact. As I left the museum, dusk washed the city in bronze. Traffic lights blinked like heartbeat monitors, and every face in the crowd seemed lit from within by some unspoken knowing. The eye rested quietly behind my ordinary eyes, content now to witness without effort. The hidden door had opened once, and it would never close again. I walked home through the glowing streets, aware that each step rewrote the geometry of the world. The morning after the museum felt like waking into another octave of the same song. Everything was familiar, yet charged. The air itself slightly denser with awareness. Sunlight filtering through the blinds seemed more deliberate, like an artist placing strokes of gold on invisible canvas. I moved slower, not out of laziness but reverence, afraid that even a careless gesture might fracture the delicate harmony humming between all things. In the mirror, my eyes looked ordinary again, brown, tired, human, but behind them lingered that subtle vibration, a softness too vast to name. I thought of the eye not as a thing within me, but as something that now looked through me, patiently teaching me to translate eternity into daily language. It was no longer about visions or symbols. It was about perception itself becoming sacred. Every glance, every pause, every breath was an invocation. Outside, the city pulsed as always, cars crawling through intersections, vendors shouting, the metallic rhythm of life refusing to stop for enlightenment. Yet I noticed how even chaos had cadence. The honking of horns, the overlapping chatter, the clicking of shoes all fell into a strange, syncopated harmony. The city was an orchestra unaware of its own music, and as I listened deeper, I realized I was part of that score, both player and instrument. I walked with no destination, letting the current of the crowd decide for me. Somewhere near the river, I stopped and leaned on a railing, watching light dance across the water. Reflections broke and reformed like thoughts. The eye stirred within my awareness, opening not as a sight, but as a state, a widening stillness. For a moment, the river wasn't just water. It was movement remembering itself, and I was that same movement watching. Later that week, I began to notice small miracles disguised as accidents. A book falling open to the exact line I needed to read, a stranger handing me a coin I didn't know I'd dropped, a sudden gust of wind extinguishing a candle the moment my thoughts darkened. These were not coincidences. They were conversations between my consciousness and the world's. The eye had become a language of synchronicity. It spoke without words, asking only that I listen with my entire being. But not every day glowed with transcendence. There were mornings when the light felt heavy, when the chatter of the mind returned like static and the sacred hum fell silent. Those days tested me. The temptation was to chase the feeling, to force the magic back. Yet the more I grasped, the further it retreated. Eventually, I learned that even disconnection was part of the rhythm, an inhale after a long exhale. The eye teaches not constant ecstasy, but trust. One afternoon, a friend invited me to a small gathering people curious about mysticism, meditation, ancient symbols. They spoke with passion, each claiming glimpses of the divine in their own way. I listened quietly, noticing how the desire for truth can sometimes harden into performance. When they asked me what I believed, I hesitated. Then I said, belief is the shadow of knowing. Once you've seen light directly, you stop worshiping its outline. The room went still. For a moment, I feared I'd said too much. Then someone whispered, "So the Eye of Horus, it's inside all of us?" I nodded. "It's not inside us. It's what's looking through us right now." After that evening, I walked home under a bruised purple sky, the kind that seems to remember ancient dust. Every street lamp flickered like a signal. Somewhere deep within, I sensed the eye smiling. I realized that awakening wasn't meant to isolate. It was meant to dissolve the boundaries that keep us pretending to be separate. The hidden door doesn't open for escape, it opens for return. Days passed, like pages turning in a book written by invisible ink. Work continued, responsibilities returned, yet something fundamental had shifted. I found beauty in repetition. Making coffee became a sacred act, the hiss of steam, the swirl of aroma, the first sip like communion. Waiting in line turned into practice. Each stranger ahead of me another reflection of the same awareness wearing a different story. Sometimes I'd sit in a crowded cafe and soften my gaze until everyone blurred into gentle motion, like a field of consciousness moving through human form. It was then that the eye would pulse faintly, a golden rhythm between breaths. I'd feel warmth radiate from my chest outward, touching everything without effort. In those moments, compassion wasn't a choice, it was gravity. But enlightenment, I learned, has seasons. There were nights when dreams grew strange again. Staircases looping into themselves. Doorways leading to rooms filled with mirrors. And in every mirror, a version of me whispering a single phrase, "Remember the middle path." I didn't fully understand, but the words stayed. Over time, I came to see that even spiritual vision can blind if it forgets humility. Seeing through illusions doesn't make you invincible. It makes you responsible. On a gray morning, as rain murmured against the windows, I opened my old notebook, the one from before all this began. The pages were filled with frustration, questions, half-formed prayers. Reading them, I felt tenderness rather than shame. That lost version of me had been the doorway all along. The eye hadn't appeared from nowhere. It had bloomed from longing. I whispered a quiet thank you to my own confusion, realizing that pain had been the sacred teacher wearing a disguise. Later, walking through the marketplace, I saw an old woman selling amulets. Her table was cluttered with symbols, inks, serpents, eyes. When she noticed me, she smiled knowingly, as if we shared a secret. Without a word, she picked up a small pendant of blue glass, shaped like the Eye of Horus, and pressed it into my palm. "For remembering," she said simply. I reached for my wallet, but she shook her head. "Just promise, you'll see what you already see." I carried that amulet for weeks, not as protection, but as a reminder. It wasn't the charm that mattered, it was the recognition it evoked. When I touched it, I felt the vastness settle calmly behind my ordinary vision, patient and alert. There came a night when I stood on my balcony watching the city breathe, a million windows glowing, dimming, glowing again like a collective heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside that rhythm, I sensed an intelligence too intricate for language. The eye expanded softly, and I realized I was witnessing the planet think. Every human mind, every passing thought, a neuron in Earth's luminous brain. We were not observers of consciousness, we were its circuitry. The awareness struck like gentle lightning. Awakening is not an individual achievement, it is a communal remembering. Each person who sees clearly becomes a lens through which the universe recognizes itself. The hidden door is not mine alone. It exists wherever someone looks inward with honesty. As these realizations deepened, time began to soften. Some days felt longer, others vanished entirely. I'd lose track of hours walking through the park, each step dissolving into rhythm. I stopped rushing. The world had waited this long for me to listen. The least I could do was move at its pace. And then, one ordinary evening, the eye fell utterly still. No light, no pulse, just presence limitless, unadorned. It wasn't a vision, it was reality seen without filters. The city lights shimmered, the breeze smelled faintly of rain, and for a single endless heartbeat, everything was one seamless motion of existence. I realized the hidden door had never been a door at all. It was awareness recognizing itself in every reflection. After that, there was no grand finale, only integration. I laughed more easily, forgave faster, listened longer. When fear arose, I watched it gently, letting it pass through the same quiet space that held joy. I began teaching without calling it, teaching just conversations with people curious about the strange calm they felt in my presence. I told them nothing new, only reminded them of what they already knew. That seeing is creating, that attention is alchemy, that love is the geometry holding reality together. Now, whenever I wake before dawn, I sit by the window with eyes half closed. The horizon blushes, and the city begins its slow exhale. I whisper inwardly, "Thank you for another chance to see." That's the true gift of the eye, not visions or prophecy, but the steady miracle of awareness, returning home. The hidden door remains open, not behind me or ahead, but in the space between breaths, in the pause before thought chooses form. And I know that as long as I remember to look not outward, but through the world will keep revealing itself as the temple it's always been. The days after the rain blurred one into another, though each carried a delicate difference, as if the air itself had begun to breathe more deeply. The morning light looked altered, less like illumination, more like presence. Even the dust floating through it seemed aware of its trajectory. Pigeons gathered on telephone wires in perfectly spaced patterns. A gust of wind would loosen a few leaves from a plane tree, and they'd spiral downward in deliberate choreography, landing in the shape of an open eye. I'd catch myself smiling at these coincidences, though I could no longer dismiss them as mere accident. The world had become a quiet conspirator, arranging small gestures of acknowledgement everywhere I looked. Crossing the street, I noticed a child holding her mother's hand, turning back to glance at me with a faint, knowing grin as if she recognized the shimmer I carried. At the corner kiosk, the vendor handed me coffee before I even spoke, saying, "You were going to ask for this." His tone was casual, but his eyes lingered for a beat longer than usual, and I felt that subtle pulse again, the sense of everything aligning itself to meet the rhythm of thought. Each evening, when the city softened into its violet hour, windows began to light up across the skyline in patterns that resembled constellations. I'd trace them silently from my balcony, connecting lines between towers and street lamps, watching them form the same sigil that had followed me since that first encounter, the curved line, the central dot, the long gaze of Horus. The city wasn't changing, perception was. And yet, in that shift, the outer world reshaped itself in sympathy, as if eager to participate. One afternoon, I wandered through the old quarter, where narrow streets twisted beneath balconies heavy with vines. A mural covered an entire wall, a painted eye, its colors faded by decades of sunlight. The painter, long gone, could never have known that their work would someday complete a sentence the world was still writing to me. The mural's iris contained a reflection of a bird, and just as I noticed it, a real hawk circled overhead, its wings catching the light exactly where the mural's reflection met sky. The symmetry was breathtaking, and for an instant I felt the boundary between representation and reality dissolve completely. Everywhere I went, subtle echoes multiplied. The rhythm of footsteps on the pavement matched the beat of my heart. Subway doors opened the moment my thought turned toward departure. Songs on passing radios spoke lines that finished my own internal sentences. These weren't grand miracles. No trumpets of revelation, just quiet, almost playful correspondences that suggested a deeper intelligence humming through ordinary moments. The eye had widened to include the world itself, and the world, recognizing its reflection, began to look back. I started photographing small details, a crack in the sidewalk shaped like a crescent, raindrops forming concentric circles in a gutter, the flicker of sunlight through a broken window. Reviewing the pictures later, I saw they formed a sequence, an unintentional map. Each image carried a faint glimmer that my camera shouldn't have been able to capture, a soft halo of light surrounding the simplest objects. A bottle cap, a feather, the reflection of my hand in a puddle. The ordinary glowed with a kind of patient divinity, as if it had been waiting to be noticed. One morning, I took the train to the edge of the city, where the buildings thinned and open fields began. The air there was raw and clear, filled with the scent of wet soil and the hum of distant power lines. I walked along the tracks until I reached an abandoned signal tower. Its rusted metal door was marked with graffiti spirals, triangles, and that same recurring eye. Inside, light streamed through broken panels, scattering into prisms that danced across the floor. As I stepped into the tower, a gust lifted a piece of paper from the ground. It fluttered around me before landing at my feet. On it was a rough sketch, half Eye of Horus, half human iris, incomplete but unmistakably alive. Someone else had seen it. For a while, I simply stood there, listening to the wind moving through the structure. It sounded almost like whispering, though not in any language I could understand. The murmurs blended with the faint clatter of distant trains, forming a chant that seemed to rise and fall with my breath. Time expanded. I could feel the layers of the city stretching outward in all directions, each window, each alleyway, each unseen person pulsing with the same awareness that filled me. The eye wasn't mine. It belonged to the fabric of being itself. When I finally left the tower, dusk had fallen. The sky burned with copper and violet streaks. A group of starlings moved in formation above, their shifting patterns painting invisible sentences across the air. At one moment, they formed a spiral. The next, they elongated into a shape eerily like the eye again before dispersing into the horizon. I laughed out loud, unable to contain the joy of recognition. The world was composing itself around a single motif, repeating it until understanding became inevitable. Back in the city, I began to notice how even technology mirrored this awareness. Phone screens glowed with fractal reflections of my surroundings. Traffic lights flickered in triads that mirrored the rhythm of breath: green inhale, amber pause, red exhale. Street performers tuned their instruments to the same pitch that resonated in my chest. A woman humming under her breath on the subway completed a melody that had been playing in my mind. It was as if collective consciousness had begun to sync to a new frequency, subtle yet undeniable. People I passed started to look up from their phones, just for a heartbeat, as if sensing something familiar in the air. Some smiled without knowing why. Children pointed to the sky, tracing invisible shapes. Dogs paused mid-stride, staring into spaces where sunlight pooled like liquid gold. Nothing supernatural occurred, no miracles, no visions, but everything carried a hint of orchestration, a precision too elegant to dismiss as chance. At night, I'd walk along the river. The water's surface reflected the city lights as a trembling web of fire, constantly breaking and reforming. Each ripple seemed to echo the pulse of the eye, expanding outward in luminous circles. The wind carried the faint smell of ozone, of electricity and rain about to fall. The sound of distant bells from a cathedral blended with the murmuring current, creating a hymn without words. I realized that the entire environment, air, stone, metal, water, had become a single sensory organism. The city was awake, and in its awakening, it invited us to remember that we had built it from our collective dreams. The next day, the rain returned, soft and persistent. As I walked through it, I noticed people moving differently, less hurried, more deliberate. Umbrellas lifted at the same angle, footsteps fell into sync, even the honking of cars carried a rhythm that felt purposeful. The rain gathered into rivulets along the street, joining, splitting, joining again, until they formed branching lines that converged into a single stream flowing toward the river. Watching the water move, I could almost believe the whole city was breathing in unison, exhaling light through its wet asphalt skin. By the time I reached home, the clouds had begun to clear, revealing a strip of sunset glowing between buildings. The windows caught that light, refracting it into dozens of colors, each one distinct, yet woven into the same tapestry. From my balcony, I looked down and saw faces turned upward toward the glow. Some people smiled, others simply watched, silent. In that moment, the city seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the light shifted, descending along the glass facades until it rested at street level, bathing everyone in the same warm brilliance. For a brief heartbeat, all division dissolved. The eye was open through me, through them, through everything. The days that followed carried a strange stillness, as though the world were listening to itself. The air had a weightless hush to it. Even the sound of traffic seemed to drift through water. When I walked through the morning light, reflections slid over the windows like moving thoughts. A sense of attention shimmered in everything: trees, street signs, puddles, each one holding its own small silence, waiting for me to pass. I was no longer searching for meaning in these moments. They arrived uninvited, folded within the ordinary. One evening, I wandered beyond the usual streets, following a trail of light that the setting sun drew along the pavement. The buildings here were older, their stones cracked and breathing dust. The eye appeared again in the smallest of ways, a chalk drawing on a lamppost, the pattern of rust on a door hinge, the swirl of cream in a shop window's coffee cup. Each time, the recognition sparked something inside me, but softer now. The world was no longer trying to tell me something. It was simply being itself, and I was finally able to listen. I came to a narrow courtyard filled with ivy and quiet fountains. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby park, a sound so pure it felt like light turned into sound. I sat on a bench, letting the evening wrap around me. The fountain's surface caught the first stars, trembling with the movement of water. Looking into it, I saw not my reflection, but an outline of light, like a doorway half open, waiting without insistence. I leaned closer, and for an instant, the surface stilled, showing 1,000 tiny eyes instead of ripples. Each blinked once, then dissolved into silver circles. When I rose to leave, I noticed a cat watching me from the edge of the fountain. Its eyes mirrored the same calm awareness, ancient and playful at once. It followed me for a few steps, then vanished into the shadows. I thought of the eye again not as symbol or vision, but as the awareness that looks out through every living gaze. The nights grew longer. The city's rhythm shifted with the season. People moved differently, slower, as if they too felt the subtle pulse beneath the world's noise. I began to notice how the patterns that once seemed extraordinary now lived in the smallest gestures. The flick of a stranger's hand while lighting a cigarette, the reflection of a passing train across rain-streaked glass, the hum of electricity under street lamps. Everything hummed with a secret coherence. Sometimes, just before dawn, I'd wake and feel a soft vibration beneath the silence, a resonance that seemed to come from the earth itself. The same rhythm that had pulsed through the pool, the rain, the city lights, now whispered through the darkness of my room. It wasn't sound but presence, the echo of awareness folding and unfolding like breath. I would lie still, eyes open, watching the ceiling fade from shadow to pale blue, and think, perhaps the eye never closes, even when we sleep. One morning, walking along the river, I met an old man feeding pigeons. He looked up as I passed and smiled, saying, "They remember who watches them." His tone was casual, but something in it carried the same glint of recognition I'd seen in the child's smile days before. For a moment, we both stood in the same awareness, the world pausing around us. Then he returned to scattering crumbs, and I continued on my way. The farther I walked, the more the city seemed to blur between real and remembered. Bridges shimmered in the morning mist, reflections of towers bent in the current like memories of themselves. I watched a leaf spin on the surface of the river, circling endlessly before slipping beneath. The world was teaching through repetition. Everything appears, ripples, disappears, and returns in another form. Even the eye itself, once a symbol carved in stone, was only a temporary face for the formless. That afternoon, I took a train toward the sea. The motion of travel felt different now. The rhythm of wheels on the track became a mantra. I closed my eyes, and the sound turned into waves. When I opened them again, the horizon stretched wide and mercifully empty. Standing by the shore, I realized that the ocean was the oldest mirror of all. The wind scattered light across its surface in a million shifting eyes, each one open to look back. I knelt and let the water touch my fingertips. It was cold, alive, infinite. Every ripple contained reflections of clouds, gulls, fragments of Sunday. For a moment, the same expansion I'd felt before the pool in that hidden room filled me again. But it was quieter this time, no explosion of light, just the subtle recognition that awareness is the same everywhere, merely taking on new shapes. The sea, the sky, the pulse in my wrist, each moved to the same hidden rhythm. As dusk deepened, I walked along the shore and found a small shell lying at the edge of the tide. Its spiral mirrored the curves of the eye. I held it to my ear, listening, and the familiar sound of the ocean inside it felt like memory folded into matter. I left it there for the next traveler. Some symbols, I thought, belong to whoever needs them next. On the journey back, the train windows reflected my face against the fading light outside. My eyes met my reflection, and for a heartbeat, the world inverted again. The landscape looked through me. The sky blinked from within. Then it passed. Mystery had not dissolved. It had only changed temperature. It no longer burned, it glowed. Weeks later, I visited the place where the old building had once stood. The wildflowers had multiplied. Their colors were different now, deeper somehow, as though the earth had absorbed the memory of light. I knelt among them and closed my eyes. The wind brushed my face, carrying the scent of stone and pollen. Behind my eyelids, the familiar geometry of the eye emerged again, not as vision but as sensation, a quiet expansion of perception itself. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed newly made. I realized then that the door I had been seeking was never meant to be found. It was meant to be lived. Every threshold I crossed, every mirror, every coincidence had only pointed back to this simple act of being aware. The Eye of Horus, the ancient emblem, was never about sight alone. It was about remembrance, the return to seeing as creation. The city continued to hum around me, the same yet transformed. A bus rumbled by, scattering petals into the air. Somewhere, a child laughed, and the sound folded into the wind. A single drop of rain touched my cheek. Though the sky was clear, the world still moved with its own steady rhythm, unconcerned, unhurried, but now it carried an echo, a lingering awareness of itself. I started walking again, my steps matching the rhythm of my breath. The eye remained not as an image, but as a quiet undercurrent in everything. I passed a bookstore window where a line of text caught my eye. There are doors that open only when you stop looking for them. The letters shimmered briefly, then stilled. I smiled, not in surprise, but in recognition. Some nights I still dream of that pool of light, that endless corridor beneath the surface of the world. But when I wake, I no longer feel that I've left it behind. The waking world and the dreaming one have begun to trade places, merging in the soft middle ground where mystery lives. There are moments when the eye closes, when I forget, get caught in noise, drift into habit. Yet, even then, a part of me knows it is still open somewhere else, through someone else, through the countless glances exchanged each day between strangers. Awareness travels. It never stays still. And so I move with it, quietly, through each day's turning. The eye follows not to watch, but to see itself reflected in every act of seeing. It is the gaze that creates the world that shapes the gaze. Neither ends. Perhaps this is what awakening truly means, not a revelation, but a rhythm. A breath shared between the seen and the unseen. The hidden door remains open, though it leads nowhere new, only deeper into what already is. If you pause long enough, you might feel it too. The faint hum beneath your heartbeat, the city breathing with you, the moment before thought where everything shimmers, waiting to be seen. The eye is still there, waiting not above, not beyond, but here, quietly opening in you. If something inside you stirred while listening, it's because a part of you already remembers. The eye was never a symbol of watching, it was a reminder to awaken. So as you step back into your world, notice what notices you. Let a reflection, a sound, a moment of stillness become your threshold. The hidden door is everywhere, waiting for your attention to open it. And when you see through it, even for a heartbeat, you'll realize the Eye of Horus has always been your own.